All right, so this video we're going to cover the skull bones and a number of structures on those bones. So let's go ahead and go down here. We look at this, and we'll use two different skulls for this. If we go here, we've got this yellow. This is going to be the frontal bone, and then the green bones are called the parietal bones. They are separated by this suture called the coronal suture. The parietal bones are separated from each other by the sagittal suture. If we look on the side, you have this brown bone. This is called the temporal bone, and the suture around that is called the squamous suture. And then the blue is the occipital bone, and this suture right here is called the lambdoid suture. Okay. Now, just a couple more things before we transfer skulls. If we look from the side here, this red, this is the sphenoid bone, and this bright yellow is the zygomatic bone. If we look at purple here, we have the maxilla, also called the maxillary bone. These two white bones are nasal bones. And on the side here, these orange ones, these are called lacrimal bones. And I want to show you something else about the maxillary bone. If we flip the skull this way, okay, this bone right here is actually called the palatine bone. It's connected to a portion of the maxillary bone right there. That portion of the maxillary bone is called the palatine process of the maxillary bone. So let's cover some more stuff on this, but now we're going to go to this skull here. And so on the last video, I showed the inferior orbital fissure and superior orbital fissures. There's this margin up here, though. Right? This is called the superior orbital margin, or supraorbital margin, sorry. And then this is called the supraorbital notch. Okay. And when we look through the nasal canal, we have a few things here. If you look at this, I'm going to try and look so I can see what I'm pointing to here. If you look from the side there, okay, or straight through, you can see that that is a portion of the ethmoid bone actually called the perpendicular plate, and right about there, it joins up with this bone, which is called the vomer. So the vomer is a bone of its own, and the perpendicular plate is part of the ethmoid bone, okay? Now, when you look over here from the side, this is, we said, the zygomatic bone. There is a piece of the zygomatic bone that connects to the temporal bone. This piece right here is called the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. Now, this is the temporal bone. This piece that connects to the zygomatic bone is called the zygomatic process of the temporal bone, okay? And then I already showed the mastoid process and styloid process on the foramen video. But let's go down here to the base of the skull, and on either side of the foramen magnum, we have the occipital condyles. And let's see what else we have from this view. I think we're good as far as structures there. Let's go to the inside of the skull now, okay? And if we look on the inside of the skull, this is called the sella turcica. It is part of the sphenoid bone. This is the lesser wings, or these are the lesser wings of the sphenoid. And down here, we have greater wings of the sphenoid bone. If we go up here and we look at this portion here, this little fin-like structure here, it looks like, that's called the crista galli. That is part of the ethmoid bone. And on either side of it, you can see the cribiform plate, which is also part of the ethmoid bone. And so now that takes care of the actual skull, but we got to finish down here with the jaw, the mandible. And so this is the mandible, and we've got, oh, by the way, on this here, the sockets that the teeth fit into, the bony sockets, those are called alveolar processes or alveolar margins. Same thing for those that are on the mandible. Now, if you look at the foramen that are on the mandible, those in the front, those are called mental foramen. If we were to turn it around and look on the inside, you have mandibular foramen here, okay? Then we look to the side here. You've got this bony structure here. It's called the mandibular condyle. This is called the coronoid process of the mandible. You have an arm-like bar of bone here, so this is the ramus of the mandible and the body of the mandible.